Truthfully, what happens is, as children grow up, we start to educate them progressively from the waist up. And then we focus on their heads and slightly to one side.
I think in the old days, you were better off. Because nowadays, they're all specialists. Everyone's becoming better and better. And less and less. And eventually someone's going to be superb. And nothing.
Our education system has mined our minds in the way that we strip mined the earth for a particular commodity. And for the future, it won't serve us. We have to rethink the fundamental principles on which we're educating our children.
We're not here to tell everybody that they're wrong and we're right. We're not saying that we have all the answers, but we'd like to present a different way of looking at it.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to China Jeducation. This is episode 35. My name is Emily Feistritzer, and I am the founder and CEO of the Teach Now Graduate School of Education, which is located in Washington, D.C. in the United States of America.
Emily, in this festive season of ours across the world, what a gift it is for China Jeducation to have you on today. Welcome to the show. We've got so much to talk about, to get into about Teach Now and how it all came about. But to our listeners out there now listening in on this podcast that may not have heard of you before, I want to just read a quick bio. So Dr. Feistritzer, a nationally recognized leader in teacher preparation, began Teach Now in 2011, determined to revolutionize the way teachers are trained, and that is what she's done. The centerpiece of the Teach Now Graduate School of Education is what's called collaborative activities-based learning. Teacher candidates learn by doing projects together with an instructor. Emily spearheaded the development of this innovative, interactive and online learning to teach model on a custom designed platform. Dr. Feistritzer has been revolutionizing the field of global teacher preparation and certification for over 40 years. She began her career as a high school science and mathematics teacher and later became a university-level educator of teachers. She founded and served as CEO of the National Center for Education Information, which conducted several national surveys pertaining to teaching and teacher preparation and certification, and published numerous database reports on education, including the benchmarking alternative teacher certification, a state-by-state analysis updated annually from 1990 to 2010. Emily also founded the National Center for Alternative Certification, which served as a clearinghouse for data and information about alternative routes to teacher certification. Author of 45 widely acclaimed books on education and numerous reports and articles on topics ranging from teacher supply and demand to the preparation and certification of teachers, reporters, and the media rely upon Dr. Feistritzer's expertise. As an advisor to educational policy decision makers at all levels, Dr. Feistritzer has testified before Congress and state legislators and briefed members of presidential administrations. Emily earned her bachelor's in biology from Thomas More College, her master's in physics and mathematics education from the College of William and Mary, and a PhD in curriculum and instruction from Indiana University, Bloomington. And to top it all off, my researchers have also shown me that you are Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business, a top 10 women innovator, and Inc.'s top 100 most innovative women founders. What can I say apart from Emily? You are an absolute teaching guru, a machine of creation. I must ask as a first question for our listeners, do you believe in reincarnation, the notion of an everlasting soul? And in this instance, are you a bringer of higher dimensional knowledge to planet Earth's current three-dimensional plane?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that my career really began the day I was born, when my mother birthed me. My mother had been a teacher as well as her mother and her sister, and my mother just decided this child will do things in the field of education that even she back in those years was not even able to think about doing. So there is something to be said for the incarnation and reincarnation and the ability to be instilled with desire and capability to dream big and make dreams come true. So Teach Now really is the result of a lifetime, if not a generational life series of great and wonderful women who were dedicated to the teaching profession.
So, Emily, I really want to start at the beginning. Where were you actually born, and where did you grow up?
I was born in a small town in central Kentucky, in a sort of semi-rural area of Kentucky. Kentucky is in the heart of the country, and it's a sort of sleeper state. It's considered a sort of border state in terms of North and South, and it's known for its bourbon. You may or may not know that, but bourbon is not bourbon unless it's made in Kentucky, actually. So I was born there. The population of the town I was born in was 12,000 people. My father was a not highly educated person at all, who was a trade electrician. And my mother was almost finished with college. I was born in 1941. I often say I was born on Independence Day, the year Pearl Harbor was bombed. And this what became large Catholic family. I was the second of 8 children. We were, my father was the sort of town electrician. My mother had a baby every year and a half, and I helped her raise a lot of those people. So my roots are really grounded in survival and being good people who would be able to get ahead in the world if they were educated. So again, circling back to my mother and grandmother, particularly, who were educators, they really believed, rightly, that education really was the key to a better life. So that's the environment I was born into. We lived on a farm and raised our own food and had our own cows. And it was a wonderful way to be raised, actually. And then when it was time to go to high school, secondary school, my mother prevailed on the nuns in the little Catholic school in our town. There were only 82 students in the whole school. And she prevailed on the nuns to give me a scholarship. So I went to boarding school, which was back in those days a 5-hour drive away. Actually, it's not that far. But back in those days, it was a far way. So I went to boarding school and got an excellent education in secondary school. And then from there, I decided to go into the convent, which was right across the road from the boarding school. This was 1959. And for women in 1959, there were not a lot of opportunities. So I sort of at a very young age figured out that this getting a good education was a good idea. So going to the convent was a choice I made because I knew that the nuns didn't talk to each other. I was a Benedictine, and that's a semi-monastic order. So it was very quiet and peaceful. So I went into the convent mainly for that reason, to pursue my education, which was provided for free. And I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree while I was a Catholic nun, and taught high school science and math for 8 years as a Catholic nun, and left at age 30 and decided to take on the world. So I created the National Center for Education Information, which I ran from 1979 until creating Teach Now in 2011.
The National Center of Information. Is that still an entity, Emily?
No, it was the National Center for Education Information, NCEI, we referred to it fondly as. No, it was created back in 1979. There were no PCs, there were no computers, there was definitely no internet. So I felt at that time that there needed to be a one-stop source of information about education. So I just dreamed it up and created it. It was a call-in service, and people could write in. There was no email back in those days, so people either called or wrote letters to ask for information. It was a subscription service, so people paid. Yeah. And in the course from 1979 until I started Teach Now in 2011, I ran NCEI, and as you noted in your introduction, the National Center for Alternative Certification, which became a big issue in the mid-1980s and 90s, where there was a strong movement to create programs whereby teachers could get certified to teach without having to necessarily go back to college and start all over in a 4-year teacher preparation program, or even at a post-baccalaureate level. So the alternative teacher certification movement, we played a really big role in that because, as you noted, we tracked what each of the states was doing in terms of certifying teachers in the United States, which is one of the few countries in the world that requires that teachers be certified. Each state sets its own certification requirements. So it makes it very, very complicated. And we tracked and actually made available information about how people could get certified from state to state. So that whole era was very important in leading to actually the creation of the Teach Now teacher preparation program.
Yeah, indeed. And it's just the way it is. I think you can't connect the dots as it's going on. But when you look back after many years, you certainly see, that was the reason that bloomed into my dream, and you made it a reality, and that led to the next step, and of course we have what we have today, this wonderful Teach Now program, which in itself is of course constantly evolving and developing. Now I want to flip back quickly because we'll talk more about that later. You were mentioning about the schools that you grew up in, secondary school and primary school. I want to know, is there a favorite teacher in there, Emily, that inspired you as a young lady? Anyone that pops out straight away that you could mention?
Well, actually in primary school, this is a tiny school, 82 students. 82. And I think there were 3 nuns from the convent I eventually joined, who taught all those grades. And I'm sure most of your listeners think this is ancient history, but actually it was only, 70 years ago. But it was pretty primitive. And the head of the school was really a very, very strong woman and leader. And she was so good at identifying people in that school, in that tiny school, who had potential. And so she did play a big role in my sort of already established desire to do great and wonderful things. So it wasn't so much her teaching as her inspiration around dreaming big. So she played a big role.
I mean, if you don't mind me asking, in the convent, in the teaching environment, do you call them, Mrs., or do you call them how do you, what do you call?
Well, I was in Catholic schools for primary and secondary, and they were called sister, actually.
Of course.
Yeah. So, and they had saints' names, like, let's say I don't even know what their real names were. So we all took a saint's name. Like when I was a nun and teaching, my name was Sister Ambrose.
Wow.
And
Okay.
and I got to choose the name. You could choose the name you wanted, and I chose Ambrose because he was a bishop in Italy somewhere, probably Rome, and he was chanted to be by the population of the little town to be the bishop, and so that's why I chose his name. And he was a saint. So in those days, in Catholic schools, people were called when there were nuns teaching, which was true in most Catholic schools. It was Sister whatever her name was.
Mm. Right, and the sister that you mentioned earlier really kind of inspired you to dream big. What was her name, Sister?
I don't even remember. I don't remember her name. When I went into secondary school, the sister that I remember most actually was not a biology or math or science teacher, which is what I became. She was actually the English teacher, and her name I remember was Petra, Sister Petra.
Okay, Sister
Yeah,
Petra.
she taught English and mythology, interestingly enough. So I really remember those mythology classes.
Okay, well, Emily or Sister Ambrose, can we just? I've got this. I've got this article in front of me that's just been placed, and it's from it's the Fast Company article. Its title is this: 78-year-old founder of teacher education startup, also named to top 100 entrepreneur list by Fast Company. It goes on and it says, "Teach Now," which challenged the traditional teacher education model 8 years ago. And then it mentions here a 78-year-old former nun. I guess that kind of gives a wow factor, doesn't it, to any kind of article. How has Teach Now, in the essence of what you've created, challenged the traditional teacher education model? What do you mean by that?
Well, we went back to the drawing board. I've been in teacher education as a reporting on what states are doing, what institutions of higher education, colleges and universities are doing, and training teachers. And what we've seen in the last 30 years in the United States is a continual drop in the number of people who actually are studying to be teachers. It's one of the reasons that the National Center for Alternative Certification was created, because alternative ways for becoming a teacher became necessary because increasingly people were not going back to college and studying to be teachers through undergraduate our college teacher preparation programs. So the big stimulus for creating Teach Now was that phenomenon that fewer and fewer people were studying to be teachers through these traditional programs, these college-based university programs. And but as importantly, Chris, was nobody was focused on preparing tomorrow's teachers for tomorrow's students, for tomorrow's learning world, anywhere in the world. And I knew that because I am 78 years old, and I had devoted a half a century to this field. And it was so obvious that nobody was paying attention to how do we prepare tomorrow's students for tomorrow's learning world. I have an anecdotal story that played a really key role in all of this. I was visiting one of my many nieces. This was back in around 2011, and her daughter, which was my grandniece, had awakened from her nap. She had been sleeping, and she came out and she's rubbing her eyes, and her mother, my niece, said, "Oh, Hazy, come over and meet Aunt Emily." I had never met her before. And she looked at me and proceeded to walk over. She was like 18 months old. She was a toddler. And she walked over and picked up her mother's handheld device, like her iPhone or whatever. And went over and sat down in her little toddler chair, turned on the handheld device, and proceeded to open icons that she knew exactly what was behind each one of them. And I thought, how are we going to teach these kids? Like, we're not doing anything in teacher preparation to teach these kids that are literally born with a skill that many teachers at that time didn't even know how to use. So what really drove the creation of Teach Now was not just that enrollments in traditional programs were declining, but that nobody was paying attention to how do we prepare tomorrow's teachers for tomorrow's students in tomorrow's learning world. So that really was the impetus for creating Teach Now. And I was at a point I could have retired. I could have gone to Tuscany and written novels. I really didn't need to go back to the drawing board, but I wanted to. So I did. I got together a few smart people and said, let's just act like nothing exists. There's never been a teacher preparation program. So we weren't oriented to creating or fixing anything, because I had been in a field that people had been trying to fix for a very long time. So we just said nothing has ever existed. And if you were going to create the ideal program for preparing teachers in a digital age and forward that would never get old, what would that program look like? And Teach Now really is the result of asking that question. We knew that it had to be online. It had to be very technology based. It had to be digitally savvy. It had to be able to change on a dime so that it would never get old. You would be always able to switch out the resources, but you would have a platform. You would have a learning environment that would be based on what all the research had shown is the way teachers best learn how to teach. We've done surveys of teachers since the mid-1980s. The National Center for Education Information, which I founded and ran, had done, I think, 6 surveys from 1984 to 2010. And one of the questions we asked teachers was, what was most valuable to you as a teacher in gaining competence to teach, to becoming an effective teacher? And the numbers, and it was a drop-down menu, so they could choose education methods courses, they could choose the courses in the subject matter they were teaching, they could choose faculty, but the two things that teachers from 1984 to 2010, and other people actually have conducted the survey as well, and the numbers 1 and 2 reasons teachers themselves give for being most valuable in developing competence to teach were practicing it, the actual practice of teaching, and equally important, working with other teachers, colleagues. So that's what Teach Now is based on. That's why we call it activities-based, collaborative learning to teach model. And it works. So the platform, the learning platform, as you know, Chris, because you went through it, is really designed around we deliver the program in cohorts of 10 to 15 people at a time. Below 10 gets a little too few, and over 15 is too many. So the cohorts, the groups, which are formed by our students' time availability. That's the only variable that determines when a cohort is formed and when it meets. So they meet together in a virtual class session every week for an hour. And during the rest of the week, they do activities related to whatever the content that's being covered at that time.
Indeed.
And so activities-based collaborative learning to teach is quite unique to Teach Now. Nobody else is doing it yet. Probably 5 years from now, everybody will be doing it because it really is the best way for teachers to learn to be effective teachers.
Are you looking to further your career in education? Teach Now offers a convenient online teacher preparation and master's degree program completed anywhere in the world.
Reach now for Teach Now. Ain't no time for defeat now. Teachers, get off your seats now. Future generations need you now.
Work with people all over the world in a collaborative, activity-based teaching environment.
To learn more, visit teach-now.edu.
Expertise that is really outside of the box.
One person I learnt about through the Teach Now program, Emily, was Dr. Sugata Mitra's work on self-organizing learning environments, SOLs. And really the essence is very much like that, isn't it? You have these cohorts of 10 to 15, and as those, children was shown in his research, whether it be in the slums of Bombay or in a school in Newcastle in England, there's just this energy that works together with peers if they collaborate together, finding, tuning information, discovering new information. And almost again, it's that the model of the teacher being the sage on the stage. It's just moving away from that. Everyone in their right is their teacher, and the teacher in the classroom is more like the guide on the side, right? So I'm totally there with that. I think you're spot on with this current way, this current mechanism of getting the most effective way of learning and developing through. It really does work. Now, here's a comment I read: if you build it, they will come. And if you can dream it, it can happen. Is that something that very much you were inspired by from your mother, who was also a teacher? And on top of that, I watched a clippet of your PBS NewsHour TV feature, Emily. I don't know if you remember that one. And two key tenets of success that you mentioned on that was focus and discipline. Did that come through early childhood, through your mother, through your father?
It did, and it also, the focus actually, I attribute to my years in the convent, because it was, the major contribution of my 12 years in a convent actually was we didn't talk. We prayed a lot and we taught school, but we had a lot of time to think. So I was able at a very young adult age to really think a lot and be very, very focused. That life was very disciplined and very focused. And I think that played a big role in my ability, and it would in anybody's life, to accomplish what we've accomplished, because I'm not easily distracted when I'm thinking or when I'm working. And that really is true. I was married actually for a decade of my life, and my wonderful husband, who still is my best friend, used to say, I can stand over Emily when she's at her computer working on something and have a whole monologue conversation with her, and she won't hear a word I'm saying. So that focus and discipline, I attribute those characteristics to my convent life, and the dreaming came from the day I was born. I used to, back in the days before there were other things to do, like be on a computer and learn different way. I grew up in, as I said earlier, in a rural community, and we used to lay in the field and look up at the sky, and clouds would move across the sky. And I used to make up whole stories about people and clouds and villages. And, so the dreaming big has always been an essential part of my being.
Emily, two things I have to touch on there, and they're off topic, but the researchers will just have to be patient here because I think they're on topic. We're going back to when you had that white paper thinking about Teach Now and saying, let's not fix anything. Let's just look at starting a whole new system. You mentioned children and your niece, I believe, who picked up the phone and started using it. And one thing that came into my mind, because I've got four young boys, is that today's children, they're born and they're bored. And what I mean about that is, again, in the classroom, the traditional classroom, it's boring. It doesn't it doesn't shine light on the wonderful, colorful facets of a beautiful young human being and stretch them in the ways that maybe a new system, such as what the Teach Now is dipping into, can. And again, though, those two tenets of focus and discipline, I see it as a challenge bringing up children today, that although they're born and bored, they seem to have so much that they can get on with. There's so much at fingertip now in this digital information age. But with that comes a lack of focus and discipline. And I'll give you an example. Like, my son would start a game on his iPad when I allow him to go on it. And if he can't get it first, he'll kind of move on and go on to another game, or he'll download another game. And it's that constant lack of focus and discipline to stick to a task. And so I worry, born and bored, but lacking focus and discipline, we must somehow come up with a way that our classrooms can connect into these children's minds and hearts where they're not bored, but they can also remain focused and disciplined. And that word resilience really comes into it.
Absolutely, Chris. I don't think that focus and discipline is intuitive. And so that's why I think schools will always exist, and there will be structured environments where people can learn to focus and be disciplined. Like your children are a perfect example. Left to their own devices, if they didn't have, parents who cared and knew how to teach a child to be focused and stick with problem solving, they would probably wind up being chimpanzees. The thing that separates our species is our ability to reason and to go from A to B to C to D to Z, and sometimes jump over some of those steps as you get older. But I think discipline and focus are taught and learned by the learner, and parents and teachers play the key roles in enabling people to do that in a way that they can dream big and problem solve. Otherwise, life becomes chaos without it. And it is the thing that separates human beings from all the other animals. And we have to teach that. I think that is part of, if you go back to Aristotle and Socrates, Aristotle sat at Socrates' knee, so there's a need for that place where young children can learn how to bring together all of these things that they're exposed to in ways that I never was as a child. I mean, there's just so much information out there, and there's so many exciting things going on. And you turn on a device and the world is your cookie.
Yeah.
But that's where parents and teachers, and that's why it's important to train teachers. Teach Now's long mission statement is to equip, enable, and empower teachers to go into any learning environment anywhere in the world and be able to diagnose where each of those learners they're responsible for as a teacher are coming from, and then be able to design and implement learning experiences that ensure that each of those young people actually does learn, grow, and develop. That's really what Teach Now sets out to do.
And another thought that came into my mind, talking about flipped learning, which is another essential instrument that I learned through the Teach Now program. You were talking about lying in a field looking at clouds, and I remember doing that too, and I think I hope a lot of our listeners have done that and tried to look at what the clouds might form into, and is that an animal you can see or something like that, and as you said, even start talking and writing a story about it, or narrating a story. But maybe, Emily, what we need to do is flip that. So in our classrooms today, we might have a 40-minute period where we take 25 children outside, lie down on our backs and look at the clouds. Maybe in the old days that would be a bit strange, but maybe that's what we need to do. We need to flip and mix it up a bit, because children in my class, they're not touching the ground with their bare feet. They're in sky-rise buildings and they're touching keyboards all the time.
No, we have to provide spaces for children to think about nothing. And what a wonderful opportunity. I think that's a great idea, Chris. Maybe we should make that an activity and Teach Now. Seriously, because that is what we need to be doing, is teaching, providing environments. Teaching is an interesting word in and of itself, but I like to think of teaching in a digital age as providing environments for young people to think, and problem solve, and putting them out on a field, looking up at a sky and telling a story out of clouds is a great activity. And kids really need to do those kinds of things, even if they're in a classroom, if they just close their eyes and imagine. But those are the things that we need to teach children to be able to do, because knowledge acquisition is so easily come by. When I was a teacher, when my mother was a teacher, when my grandmother was a teacher, the teacher was the dispenser of knowledge. You went to school to acquire knowledge, and if the teacher didn't know it, you never learned it, basically. And that is so unnecessary now. There are kids coming into classrooms, physics classes, math classes, English classes, Chinese classes. There are kids coming into classrooms that know more than the teacher does when it comes to basic knowledge about a subject. So the role of the teacher has changed to being facilitator, coach, evaluator, director of teaching kids how to think, how to be disciplined, how to problem solve. It's a whole nother world when it comes to what the role of the teacher is going forward in formal education.
And back to the being bored bit. I'm sure parents listening to this now have often groaned when their son or daughter says, "Oh, dad or mum, I'm so bored." And I actually think now, turning that on its head, I think that's a great thing. And I even say it to my son, that is a great thing. And he goes, "Well, what do you mean it's a great thing?" I said, "Well, now you can try and be creative. Think of something to do. Go a little bit out of the box instead of having every sweet available to you at your fingertips. And you're just going to gobble and guzzle them down till you feel sick."
I remember one of the books I wrote was called Teacher Crisis, Myth or Reality. Because, and this was back in the 80s, I wrote a book called The Making of a Teacher, which is a report on teacher preparation and certification. And in both of those books, there was a lot of news media stories about teacher shortages, that we weren't going to have enough teachers and there are not enough people studying the right things, and inner cities need more teachers than the suburbs, and so on. So I would do a report that would actually show that we're producing far more teachers than we need, but that they're not teaching where they're needed or what they're needed. So the books that I did were all really analyzing data to set the records straight on what really was an issue and what really wasn't an issue and what really needed to be attended to. So I didn't write methodology books because I still don't believe that great teachers come from a laundry list of behaviors that they should engage in. So I still believe that the role of the teacher is to be a sage, is to be a guider of learning, to be a problem solver, him or herself, so that if you walk into a classroom in Beijing and it's got people from 10 different cultures and all kinds of backgrounds, the role of the teacher is to, on day one, hopefully before day one, know who those kids are, like where do they come from, what are their ability levels, what have they achieved, so that from day one of the beginning of the school year, that teacher knows who those kids are and can guide their learning, and not stand up there and be a dispenser of facts and figures.
Yeah, because I remember that. Oh, I can't remember the quote offhand, but it's something like, if a teacher can be replaced by a robot, then it probably should be.
Exactly. If you ask people, anybody, you ask yourself, who were the teachers that most influenced you? I guarantee you it will have been a caring teacher.
Yes,
somebody who was really zeroed in on the kids they were teaching and figured out ways to make that class every day interesting and productive.
Yeah, here. Emily, I've got this little note I've been given. You mentioned earlier, when you were in the convent, and you said it was a quiet convent. You didn't talk. Obviously, when you were teaching, you were talking, weren't you? It wasn't silent.
No.
Okay, so there you go. It's been confirmed. Emily did talk. It wasn't silent. Great stuff. Emily, here's one for you. Let's talk about music a second. And just the first thing that comes into your mind. Can you give me a favorite song that really resonates with you? And don't think too much about it.
Without You by Mariah Carey.
Wow. And a one sentence of why that would be.
It's so profound. Do you know the song? Do you know the
Yes,
song?
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
It's sort of at the guts of relationships and, what really matters, that whole, she goes off into, I can't live without you. So it's so deep and real. And I think it's a song that doesn't even have to pertain to the breakup of a relationship. It's
Right.
just sort of the essence of what matters in our lives. So that's the one that. But I'm a real Neil Diamond fan, so there are lots of Neil Diamond. Holly Holy, I just love Holly.
No, look, now you're rolling them off. Come on. I asked you for one. Right, Mariah Carey, Without You. Okay, so I mean, you can't do without Education, can you? I think you definitely agree with that. That's certainly a sentiment that we've gone over many times. Now, Emily, I know, and obviously I've been to your office many years ago, before I even knew I was going to go on the program, as destiny has it. And I know you are a pretty hands-on CEO. Would I be right?
That is correct. Teach Now is my life. It's my life.
It's your baby, as they say in the world of business and entrepreneurship. Now, being 78, which I think a lot of people would say is quite unique, a CEO of a big company in America. Do you get time to do things outside of work? I'm sure you do. And if you do, what are your favorite kind of non-work things where you can go a little bit off track with the to-do lists?
I'm a walker and a dog lover. So I have 3 little dogs. And as soon as we finish this interview, I'll go for like an hour-long walk with my dogs. I'm a reader. I'm reading Sapiens right now. I love to read. I love movies. I like to go to the movies. Those are my sort of favorite things besides Teach Now to do. I have friends that I hang out with from time to time. But I love my own company. I like to be alone. I'm looking out my window in my beautiful home right now, which is very peaceful and quiet. So a thread of my life has always been to be somewhat contemplative. As I mentioned earlier, I learned that and learned it well. And so I like to be quiet and alone and think about nothing. I like to cook. I'm a good cook. So I have a passel of things that I do that make my life quite full.
And I mean, when you go for your walks, Emily, with your 3 dogs, do you listen to podcasts? I'm sure you're an avid China Jedi listener, aren't you?
Well, I'm going to be.
If you're an English-speaking teacher from anywhere in the world and you have a bachelor's degree but need an official and accredited teaching license to get a job, get a visa to teach abroad, or most importantly to learn all those things you wish you knew before you stood in front of 30-plus students, then reach now to Teach Now and secure a professional US District of Columbia license in as little as 9 months. Online in no time, low cost, high quality. Teach Now. Get in the game. Immediately receive a $100 discount off your tuition by signing up to the Teach Now program via the link www.teach-now.edu/China Jedi.
May the smile be with you.